The world has entered 2022 in the stage of polycrisis. Climate change poses existential threat to humanity, disproportionately affecting poor economies predominantly based on natural resources and related economic sectors such as agriculture, forestry, and fisheries. Yet even the more diversified economies are vulnerable to climate change, while climate risks are of cascading nature, causing unprecedented risks for global economy and security. Phasing out fossil fuels and building the adaptation capacity are of critical urgency and importance. But are we on track to respond to this threat? So for this episode, my co-host is my colleague, Anastasia Bekish, who is Environment and Climate Change Manager at the regional program RECONOMY. The guests with us for this episode are
Saleemul Huq, who is Director of the International Center for Climate Change and Development and Professor at the Independent University in Bangladesh, as well as Associate of the International Institute on Environment and Development in the United Kingdom. Saleem is an expert in adaptation to climate change in the most vulnerable developing economies and has been a lead author of the third, fourth, and fifth assessment reports of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. Saleem also advises the least developed countries group in the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. Saleem, thank you for being part of this episode.
Thank you for having me.
We also have with us Louise van Schaik, who is head of the Klingendael International Sustainability Center at the Klingendael Institute and project manager of the Planetary Security Initiative. Her fields of expertise are climate change and natural resources, global health, and EU external action. Louise, thank you for joining the conversation.
Thank you.
George Abulashvili, who is Director of the Energy Efficiency Center in Georgia, a co-implementing partner of Helvetas in frames of the regional program RECONOMY. Is the former advisor of the Energy Charter member countries in the energy sector investments. George was involved in the implementation of the Protocol on Energy Efficiency and related environmental aspects. He also served as an expert to the Georgian Parliament on energy issues. His experience spans from energy efficiency and renewable energy to climate change mitigation and analysis of environmental policies and regulations. George, thank you for joining.
Thank you for having me. It's a real pleasure to be part of the Helvetas/RECONOMY community and contributing to the climate change by using a tool of the education, in particular professional education. I believe knowledge is a power, and strengthening that power will bring the results.
Thank you very much, George. To start, the IPCC report on climate change impacts, adaptation, and vulnerability, which was published this year, confirmed that the adverse impacts of climate change are far greater, more frequent, and vastly more disruptive than previously understood. So the world was warned that minor or incremental responses would not be sufficient to deal with the crisis. To start with you, Saleem, what are the risks of not going carbon neutral by 2050?
Well, first of all, I think 2050 is too far a timeline. It just is not a viable option anymore. The Working Group 3 report, which came out most recently of the 6th assessment report, has shrunk the timeline for action. It's just a matter of a few years now, and definitely by 2030 at the latest to take drastic actions, which are not happening at the moment. So we are certainly not on the path to stay below 1.5 or even 2 degrees. We are well over 2 degrees, headed for well over 2 degrees, unless we take drastic action now, immediately, urgently. And as far as the impacts are concerned, we heard from Working Group 1 that they now have unequivocal evidence that impacts of climate change, because of human-induced changes in the temperature of over 1 degree that's already happened because of greenhouse gas emissions, are happening. They're now attributable. So the warning is no longer a warning. It's happening. The rain is falling on our heads. We need to take cognizance of the reality. And I would say that the sixth assessment of the IPCC, which is the sixth done in the last 30 years, is the last one that we get a warning. There's no more warnings. And by the time we get the seventh assessment in 5 or 6 years' time, it'll just be a catalog of all the harm that has already happened, the losses and damages that we warned about, but we didn't take seriously and we didn't do anything about. They are going to happen. And so, the time of warnings, in my view, are gone. The house is on fire, as Greta Thunberg says, and she's absolutely right. Talking about doing something is no longer an option. Just doing what we're supposed to do has to be done.
No, thank you. Thank you very much, Saleem. And what do you think, Luis? What are the risks of not going carbon neutral by 2050?
Yeah, well, I think Dr. Saleem Huq has pointed out already how grave the situation is and how we are currently already confronted with climate change. Not only in the vulnerable countries, but everywhere on the globe. We see the weather changing and having dramatic impacts on food production, water shortages, and thereby also conflict risk. So the urgency is very big. The energy transition is ongoing, but of course not going fast enough. So we need to step up. In Europe, this process is now undertaken because we are also confronted with high fossil energy prices. So that is an extra kind of additional incentive to undertake action. But yeah, I'm not sure if it's going to go enough. And if the EU would manage by 2050, you only have 10% of global greenhouse gas emissions. And so if the EU and perhaps a couple of others would do it, it will still not be enough. So we need to find ways, let's say, to turn that into a global effort, and rapidly so. And one thing of doing that, of course, is by showing that it's possible and that it can be also success and also be cheaper to have a different energy system. And maybe also a different economy, more circular economy, which is less dependent also on fossil fuels and carbon burning.
Thank you, Luis. Indeed, achieving carbon neutrality by mid-century requires a radical transformation within a short period of time. Saleem, are we doing enough in terms of building the global adaptation capacity?
Absolutely not. As Luis just mentioned, we used to think of the adaptation deficit in the poor countries like mine in Bangladesh. But now it's everywhere. Even Belgium just had a flood a few months ago, and Germany had a flood that almost 200 people lost their lives. It's happening everywhere. Right now, in the last 48 hours, the city of Durban has had a number of deaths from floods. Every day when I talk, I have a new example of people dying from human-induced climate change impacts. Now, they are quite clearly all attributable to human-induced climate change that is happening, and we are suffering losses and damages. So the answer is no, we are not doing enough either on adaptation or on mitigation, and we have to do a lot more, a lot faster. We've got a lot of promises, but the promises are not being delivered.
Yeah, I think I can fully agree to that. And there's also much more potential, for instance, to do greening programs, better water management, climate resilient agriculture. And these programs could also have, let's say, other benefits, environmental peace building efforts, employment opportunities. So yeah, the question is, are you going to send another army to the Sahel to keep things quiet, or are you going to try, let's say, another way? Although that might also cynically require military to do it, to be able to implement such programs in some parts of the world might be quite difficult. But we have to put the effort in, because we don't have another opportunity. And a lot of these, let's say, interventions to green and to build nature also have co-benefits for absorbing carbon. So they are in a way no regret smart options that you have to consider in any case. You know, they will help you to achieve both adaptation and mitigation, and then possibly also help you to make societies more stable, get more jobs on the countryside for young people, thereby possibly reducing migration, although migration is caused by many factors. So yeah, it's in any case a smart idea to focus at adaptation, but it should not be an excuse not to do mitigation, of course.
How would you, back to you, Luis, how would you assess the progress of EU neighborhood countries in the Western Balkans and the Eastern Partnership region? So does the European Green Deal have a chance to become a game changer for the region? And what else should be done to accelerate the transition?
Yeah. Well, I think in the Western Balkans, it's and the rest of the European neighborhood, we still see a huge fossil dependency, and also perhaps a lack of confidence that it's really possible to do the European Green Deal and to become stronger. So the idea of the European Green Deal is that you transition to a cleaner economy, not only to save the environment, but also because the energy transition is going to happen in any case, and in order to become economically stronger and more competitive, you do this and take a first mover advantage. But the mood in several countries in our neighborhood and also in the Western Balkans is still, yeah, we might not be able to afford this. Huh? And this is, I think, very important that this is overcome, because if you see the detrimental impacts of the use, for instance, of coal on health of populations, the local pollution level, but also the costs of fossil energy, which also in the neighboring countries and in the Western Balkans have grown significantly. And if you look at the other hand at the potential of renewables in the sunny south, there is huge potential to make it happen also there. And why should they first use, let's say, our second-hand diesel cars? Why not, you know, try to come up with, you know, cheaper electric vehicles at once? Let's say, do things differently and also organize the economy differently so that you really leapfrog forward. Of course, one of the biggest challenges now, and maybe you will still get to that, is that you also need to source this renewable economy. And of course, you need scarce metals for that, and rare earths. And we saw the issue of the lithium mine recently in Serbia. So there is also choices to be made, trade-offs to be made, and we also need to ensure that Europe offers, let's say, an alternative so that we can really secure sustainable mining practices if we go for that route, and that the people who live in these areas really also benefit from it if they're transitioning. So unlike in the old oil energy, where with the exception of Norway, in a lot of places in the world, the areas where the oil and gas is being pumped up are not necessarily often the richest parts of the country. Very often they're the least well-off parts of countries. We need to avoid that in the new economy, so that people really benefit if they enter into this new economy and see that they can also enjoy the benefits from it.
Thank you, Luis. And George, you being from Georgia, one of the Eastern Partnership countries, how would you assess the progress? What are your thoughts?
Quite a lot has been already elaborated by the colleagues. The progress is there for sure, but whether it is sufficient or not, that's the question. Absolutely not. So the progress is not sufficient. And being from the country of Eastern neighborhood and looking for the developed markets, we, aside to the success stories and good examples given by the opinion leaders, the countries of the leading economies. Aside to that, we need also relevant access to the resources that will bring the progress here. Luis was mentioning about the electric cars. So the technology transfer, access to the technologies and affordability of the local economy to that newly developed technologies is the issue. So aside to the access to the resources, affordability to be into the point, into the focus point, and also lots of efforts to be made for the technology development and technology and innovation development, not only in the developed countries, but in the countries of the Eastern neighborhood, and as they are called, into the third world countries as well. So having examples of the transportation, most of the third world countries are using used cars. So the time period when the new technologies that are affordable and available into the developed world will become affordable into the developing countries, it's around 10 years or even longer. Dr. Saleem was talking about the urgency of the measures. Yes, but whether 10 years or longer period is sufficient for achieving of the climate goals, I believe not. So the simultaneous development of every part, every country in the direction of the climate neutrality has to be must, and having kind of different level of the development in the economic processes may not be good platform in achieving of the climate goals worldwide.
Thank you, George. And recently, the Ukrainian Deputy Minister of Environment, Roman Shakhmatsenko, addressed the Assembly of the UN Environment Programme from a bomb shelter, calling the world for an urgent action, phasing out the fossil fuels and recognizing the environmental dangers and the consequences of war. Germany has already suspended the certification process of their gas pipeline Nord Stream 2 in response to the tragic events in Ukraine. How do you think, Luis, how will the global energy and climate policy change in the light of the current events in Ukraine?
Yeah, thank you for the question. This is really the most interesting question of today, I would say. So on the one hand, we see an increased realization in Europe that by continuing imports of oil and gas, we fund the Russian war industry or the war making with 1 billion euros a day, whereas we have given support also of 1 billion, but then in total, and the war is now already going for nearly 2 months. So this is really the only way that we can hit Russia really harsh, by installing such an embargo of oil and gas. And the EU also says that they want to quickly and drastically reduce the dependency. But some of the countries in the European Union are so dependent that literally industries will have to fall still and people will be in the cold. And that's, of course, what makes it so harsh. So in the energy circles, we've always talked about this mutual dependency. You know, the oil and gas comes out of the ground. You cannot store it forever. You have to put it in the pipelines. The pipelines cannot be easily rebuilt the other way around. So there is this mutual dependency. But this is argued on the basis of rational economic argumentation. And what we now see is that this war is being driven by emotions and by irrationality. So all these things are less valid. I'm not sure if this embargo will eventually get there. I think the pressure is mounting. The European Parliament has voted in favor of it. Several member states are in favor of it. But it's also going to be extremely painful. What is clear is that this is really catalyzing energy transition in Europe. All of a sudden, big industries that said it would be very difficult for them to keep going with fossil, consider now hydrogen, for instance, as an alternative. That being said, it takes time to build this. We also see a return of coal used, and we also, of course, see an increased use of LNG, liquefied natural gas, which is also very polluting. You know, there's a lot of methane in the production. So there is a risk that we now get a kind of LNG lock-in. That is also a bit of a worry, or it is a worry, I should say. So yeah, we see a mixed situation, but I think, yeah, I'm leaning towards the positive side that this is accelerating the transition. It is making big industries think about alternatives. It is making citizens more aware of possibilities to make their houses, transport, and so on, to decarbonize these. And it is accelerating the negotiations on the Fit for 55. It is also changing the position in the newer EU member states, so for instance, Poland, Hungary, other countries, to be a bit more supportive of climate change, because they also have realized now more the perils of the oil and gas imports. So it is a change, yeah, whether that should be the reason, of course, it's questionable, but it is accelerating. Just maybe a final note, for my own country, the shortage of materials and labor are really limiting factors at the moment. So if you want to insulate your house, or if you want to change the buildings and the infrastructure, these are now, let's say, the limiting factors. So I hope that they are going to find solutions for that as well. Stop here.
Do you think that the current war will be the additional motivational factor for the EU neighborhood as well?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. You already see that in the EU funding, at least 30% has to be climate related. The EU is set to launch at the end of May, or the second half of May, a new international energy strategy that will be a completely different document than previous international energy strategies. Before, you know, it was about managing the relations with supplier states, with OPEC. Now it's going to be about how to bring down fossil use also in other countries, how to support other countries with their energy transition. So this is going to be a completely different ballgame, and the focus is likely to be on the neighborhood countries and on Africa. I think there will be a huge push for hydrogen, for energy efficiency measures. But Saleem, I think also that the focus on reducing fossil energy use might go to the detriment a little bit of the adaptation funding. But in short, I am quite positive that it will provide new ways to help the neighborhood countries in their transition and lowering their dependency on Russian oil and gas supplies.
Thank you, Liz. George, what are your takes on this? You're based in the South Caucasus region. Do you see any ongoing political shifts related to energy security connected to the situation in the region?
Well, definitely, yes. There are some movements, but the first steps are made with some delay. Unfortunately, I would say not only South Caucasus countries, but all the world is reacting on the happenings, not predicting and planning in advance. So yes, there are some dynamics in the process, but with some delay. And I would be happier, and the countries will be more stable, more stable if they would plan and act before the happening. This is in relation of the political military conflict in between of Russia and Ukraine. And also this is true for the adaptation measures or even mitigation measures where we are talking at large. Unfortunately, short-term planning or reactive type of measure-taking policies is not effective. So the country should start long-term planning in all directions, including energy security, but mostly focused on the climate change related issues, mitigation/adaptation.
Thank you, George. And there is the urgency of investing in the energy security in the South Caucasus region. This way also creating new jobs for people. We need to test better business models, right, in terms of access to finance and skilled workforce and facilitate policy instruments. So back to you again, George. Can you walk us through what are you doing in the region in the frame of the regional program RECONOMY?
The new/clean energy solutions are reflected into the national regulations in all South Caucasus countries. So policy is there, regulation is there, but to bring them to life, to benefit out of those regulatory policy changes, there's a desperate need that the people at the mid and low level, they are adapting their professional skills to the current requirements, and they are capable to deliver high quality services to the society in order to achieve mitigation and or adaptation goals. In particular, we are focused on one glance, very simple, professions and their development, like installation of the proper installation of the walls, proper installation of the windows, proper installation of the building related renewable energy technologies. Without those, all the policy measures and all the national targets may never be achieved. So those are the interventions we are trying to promote or contribute to the individual countries at this stage, and later on we believe we can multiply our effects via replicating success of the stories in one country to another country. So this is in brief what we are doing under the RECONOMY project in the South Caucasus.
Thanks a lot, George. And let me come back to the international level with our last question today. Unlearning the collective helplessness was the frontline topic of the key international security event, the Munich Security Conference. Luis, are you optimistic about the world's chances to overcome the collective helplessness and the rising tide of crisis happening today?
Well, I'm never too negative. So the glass for me is usually half full. I would like to emphasize that we have come so far. And also if I see the many industries that said they could never do without fossil, and now all of a sudden so much more seems to be possible. Where I do still see a concern is with the security sector itself. It is realizing that climate security risks are real. But I don't see, for instance, in the military, a lot of effort being made to make their own contribution to emission reductions. And I think if we can have zero carbon Navy ships, zero carbon air fight jets, that I can go with retirement, because we don't need any more climate specialists and we have kind of saved the world. I mean, this is the ultimate high-tech industry. And I hope they're also going to wake up and make their contribution, and not only saying that climate is a threat multiplier, but also making their contribution to reduce emissions.
Thank you, Luis. And Saleem, what about your level of optimism?
I'm an eternal optimist like Louise. So even in the most dire situation, I'm always thinking about how do we get out of digging the hole and then start filling the hole. Right now we are digging. We are still digging, and we have to stop digging. And I'm hopeful that sense will prevail on the energy security front. I'm not an expert like the other speakers are, but my own feeling is that it is a wake-up call for a global economy that has been hooked like a drug addict to fossil fuels, now realizing that they cannot continue to depend on that source of energy, and they have to think out of the box and do things differently going forward. I hope that will be the wake-up call that's happening, certainly happening in Europe with respect to Russian oil and gas, but it should be more broader for all fossil fuels all over the world.
Thanks a lot. George, are you in the club of optimists together with myself, Louise, and Saleem?
I believe yes, and I'm aside to the optimist. Being an optimist, I'm a believer as well. So yes, I do believe that we all together we can achieve the goals. And I do not know whether it is optimism or realism, but yes, absolutely yes. I'm part of you, and I am among you, and I do believe also that there is a role assigned to every single person in the world to this movement. Absolutely. And if we will manage to translate that message to each of them at personal level, they will do much more than the current activists are doing now.
Luis, George, and Saleem, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Thank you, Chloe.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
In 2020, Helvetas has partnered with the Swedish International Development Cooperation Agency to facilitate an inclusive and green economic development program in the Eastern Partnership region and the Western Balkans. The majority of the countries that we work in are acting, but aggregate efforts to reduce greenhouse gas emissions are not sufficient.
Drivers such as environmental knowledge and awareness, recognition of the business case for a green economy, and environmental regulation and legislation should contribute to a shift in public policies and private sector enterprises to focus on the double dividend, the intersection of activities that both decarbonize the economy, build the adaptation capacity, and lead to inclusive economic development.
Changes in practices and business models will focus on innovative ways of production and consumption patterns. This includes limiting the use of fossil fuels and plastics and stimulating public and private investments that align with the SDGs. These are legitimate concerns about an overemphasis on economic growth in the inclusive systems approach to program design and management, which many people feel pays insufficient attention to or even willfully ignores the environment.
For RECONOMY, facilitating the transition to a green economy means understanding and addressing economic driving forces to environmental degradation. The program pays attention to the importance of access and the role of natural resources for production and consumption, and environmental constraints and opportunities.
Thank you for watching and listening to Inclusive Plug powered by RECONOMY. See you next time.